Good morning, Jeremy.
Now, last week we were hearing about a horse called Panic, and it's, still to be, decided, I guess, impact on Warrnambool as such. Where are we stopping this morning on the Pioneer Board?
I was going to talk about Shanks Jenkins, partly because he was... in latter years, a councillor, and I have some connection, and some of his antics were quite unusual.
Oh, okay, all right. Comparable to your time on council, perhaps? Or?
Oh, no. I was much less controversial, I think, yes.
Well, where should we start with his story?
Shanks Jenkins was born in Scotland in 1834, and he came to Melbourne in 1854, so only tender age of 20. It's quite interesting how young men decided that they would go to the other side of the world to make a new life for himself. He was an unassisted passenger, so it would indicate that he had sufficient money behind him, but he was recorded as being a labourer, and I don't believe that from the time he arrived in Australia that he was employed in that job at all.
Right.
He had, though, before he'd come to Australia, been an apprentice to Mackenzie and Matthews Architects in Aberdeen and Elgin. So he had some training. Why he was recorded as an architect, I have no idea. But after he arrived in Melbourne, he gained second prize for the design of St Andrew's Church in Carlton.
Right. So nobody questioned his,
no.
qualifications
of course,
as such?
There was possibly not an architect on every corner of the
at the time.
metropolis in Melbourne. But in the same year as his success in Melbourne, he moved to Warrnambool, which was interesting. And for 4 years he carried on the business of a timber merchant, a building contractor, an agricultural implement and machine maker. So he certainly was versatile. Of course, I think that quite often you would have someone who would take up a hotelier's licence, but he may have previously claimed to have been a chemist and a teacher and run a produce store. So people had to be pretty resourceful and innovative, and of course that was what a pioneer was.
Right,
someone who challenged and went out and explored the new world and was prepared to take anything on.
Yeah, right, and a bit brazen as well, possibly. By the sounds of things.
And many of the pioneers, if you look at their history, had checkered careers as far as their wealth went. They were extremely wealthy one minute and next to bankrupt in another, but would regenerate. Quite often, people who are entrepreneurial tend to be like that.
Yeah, right.
But they contribute a great deal to our economy and our community, and the place grows, I think, when you've got those people. But in 1858 he became the town surveyor of Port Fairy, and he was at that same stage still running his other timber merchant building contractor business in Warrnambool. So
right.
he was a capable person, obviously had some good managers. Then he took on positions in Hamilton as a town surveyor, shire engineer at Mount Rouse, and then he went to Richmond as a town surveyor. So
right.
he really got around and spread his wings. But while he was in Richmond, he was awarded second prize for the design of the Swan Street Bridge. And that design was adopted, which I think, really quite to his credit.
So that's the bridge we have there today?
Yes,
yeah, right,
yes.
Yeah.
But then I think even more importantly, or the one that I look at much more often, is he gained first prize for the design of the Princess Bridge in conjunction with a Mr Granger. And I think that's a beautiful structure, and sometimes if you're walking along the Yarra, I gaze at it and think that this was a substantial structure in that period, and the engineering requirements, apart from the beauty of it, for it to be still standing and still stable and strong after that period of time he was obviously a talented guy.
With a bit of a specialty in bridges as
well,
I would say.
But he was also a pioneer of the 8 Hours movement in 1856.
Right.
Here in Warrnambool, he chaired a meeting at the local commercial hotel, which is now the Whalers, and he had the capacity to go on in later life to be elected to the Richmond Council in 1888, and he was mayor 1888, 1889. But this is where the interesting story comes in, I think. This is read from the Melbourne Punch on the 16th of May, 1889. Mr. J.S. Jenkins, the Mayor of Richmond, had a unique experience in the municipal history of Victoria. All his fellow councillors have met and demanded his resignation by unanimous vote and have refused to sit with him as long as he holds the office of Mayor. Right. The fact is that almost all of the 9 are men and given to very strong language and capable of no self-restraint. The language of the gutter and the prize ring have frequently been used at the Richmond Council meetings, and a bout of fisticuffs has actually taken place between the present mayor and an ex-mayor who sits in Parliament for Richmond.
Right.
So, interesting.
I was just imagining that the public gallery was probably quite well patronised at their council meetings as well.
Or maybe it was a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, maybe, yes.
But it's interesting that all of the councillors were male, that they obviously had fairly high levels of testosterone and no self-restraint, and it obviously was a combative
sort of environment.
Thing. Yes, I find that the time I spent on council was much
calmer than that.
Yes, much calmer.
So did he come back to Warrnambool at all? Or?
No, he died in Richmond in 1913, aged 78 years, but he had really made quite a contribution both in this district and further afield. And as I said, what I look at when I look at the Princess Bridge in Melbourne, I think of John Shanks Jenkins, and I'm pleased he spent some time in Warrnambool as well.
Indeed, it's a nice connection. Glenys, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jane.